You are watching Sammy the Interviewing Toucan, made possible by the Indiana Young Readers Center. Hey, everybody. I'm Sammy the Interviewing Toucan, and I am so excited to be here today with Shari Wagner. Hi, Shari.
Hey, Sammy.
I am so excited to talk to you because you were Poet Laureate of Indiana, and I love Indiana and I love writers, and I'm just beyond thrilled to get to talk to you today.
Well, I'm excited to talk with you too.
Yay! So let's just dive right in. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your connection to Indiana?
Sure. Well, I have a very close relationship with Indiana. I was born here in the town of Goshen, which is in northern Indiana. Then we lived for a few years in Indianapolis when I was really young and Fort Wayne. And then we settled in near the town of Markle, which is just south of Fort Wayne. And I grew up in 10-acre woods surrounded by cornfields. And it was great because I really love nature. You know, I loved exploring the woods. A writer that was really important to me growing up was Gene Stratton Porter, who had lived not that far away from me. So I lived there until I was in 8th grade. And then my dad was asked to be a doctor in a hospital in Somalia. So we were on the Horn of Africa for a year. And I loved that experience. And it was so different. And that's where I started writing poetry. I was just amazed by the desert land. It was so beautiful and just so expansive. And there, the trees, which I had come to love trees in the woods where I lived. A lot of them were baobabs, so they looked like they were upside down with their roots up in the air. And there were camels and nomads. People carried their houses. So I started writing about that. And then when we came back to Indiana, it was like I was seeing the landscape around me differently, and I wanted to write poems about that too. So I just kept writing poetry. And I was fortunate in my high school there, Norwell High School, that I studied with some wonderful English teachers, and we had a visiting poet come into our schools for a semester. And then after that, I moved back to Goshen for college, went to Goshen College, and again, studied poetry and other subjects too, of course. After that, I went for 3 years and I lived in Louisiana and worked with a community of people that were the Clifton Choctaw tribe. And they were a very isolated group in the piney woods. And I was there to help them research their history for federal recognition. And that developed my vision as a writer too, because they were great storytellers. And I loved how just all the places along their 12-mile road in the woods had history connected to it. And there was a lot of folklore, and I grew to love that, and stories about animals. And so I think that experience also had a large effect to how I developed as a poet.
That's amazing. You've had so many wonderful experiences.
I am so fortunate. And they all, they had it. I went away for a while, but then I always came back to Indiana. And those experiences had effect on, who I became as a writer. When I came back, I attended Indiana University in Bloomington, and that's where I studied poetry again, and met my husband, who is also a poet. He was in the writing program there. After that, we lived a couple years and taught in a university in North Carolina, but we missed Indiana, so we came back, and we've been living in central Indiana ever since then.
Oh, that's so great. Well, Shari, I had a question for you. And this is not one I sent you ahead of time. Sorry.
Oh,
I
that's
was wondering,
okay.
I have your book here, Evening Chore, Poems by Shari Wagner, and I'm noticing that it's the same painting as the one behind you on the wall. Now, is this a painting that's significant to you? Can you tell us a little bit about the painting?
Well, it is. It's a painting by John Demont, who was an Indiana painter, grew up here, and it's Moonrise, Indiana. So it's a landscape of Indiana. I really like John Demont's paintings a great deal, and I showed my editor for the book some of his paintings, including this one, and right away he felt like this one connected with my poetry really well.
Oh my gosh, I
Um,
love that. And it's making me inspired. Maybe I should be talking to painters too.
oh,
Hmm.
that would be a great
I'll
idea.
have to think about that. Now, Sherry, you were the poet laureate of Indiana. When were you the poet laureate?
It was in 2016 and 2017.
Wow. So that
Uh,
was for the centennial of our, no, the bicentennial of our state, right?
Bicentennial, yeah,
Oh
the
my goodness.
200th birthday of our state.
That's amazing. So what
Yeah.
was it like to be the poet laureate and what was your favorite part?
I had been already giving poetry writing workshops and readings in central Indiana. But then as poet laureate, I got to travel throughout the state, going to libraries and schools. And I went to parks and historical sites. Since it was the bicentennial, I really wanted to show poetry's connection with history. And I had been writing a lot of poems about Indiana history. So that was very cool. I went to some, historical sites like the Levi and Catherine Coffin House that was part of the Underground Railroad, and went to Lew Wallace's study and gave a poetry reading there, and also at a lot of parks because it was also the 100th year anniversary of our state parks. So my love of nature and also connected to what was going on in that celebration in our state. It was a lot of fun, and I loved meeting poets throughout the state, and I really got to feel, connected to the Indiana community of poets and of all ages, and made a lot of friendships. I think you asked me what my favorite part of it was, and that's really hard, but I do love working with kids. And so I got to go into a lot of schools and gave workshops, also into libraries. And sometimes I took kids on walks outside, and we would write poems about what we saw in nature. If it was indoors, then I'd often bring objects that I had collected somewhere in our state, and then they wrote poems inspired and described those objects, looking really closely at the object, but also, looking not just with their eyes, but with their imagination. And I brought a couple of these objects in, like one of them, I would bring like maybe enough different objects so each child could have a different object. But one of them was like a sweet gum burr from a sweet gum tree. And I remember one student comparing it to an asteroid and wrote a great poem
Oh,
about it,
that's
being like something from
wonderful.
outer space. And well, this was, you know what this is, Sammy?
I do. I
A
do know
garter,
what that is.
a shedded skin from a garter snake that I found in my yard. And I remember one student comparing it to a crinkled Kroger shopping bag.
Oh my goodness,
Uh,
what a great analogy.
yeah, and making a sound like rustling leaves. And yeah, I think kids are born poets, and sometimes we kind of lose that as we grow up. And one reason I like working with kids is that they're so imaginative, and that they make poetry uses a lot of comparisons, like what one thing is like something else, which I think reminds us how everything in life, in the universe, is connected. And even things we think are very different. So like that snake skin, is very different from a shopping bag, yet, there's a connection there. It just reminds us of those lost connections that we forget about. Um,
That's so amazing. And I think that reading poetry is great for kids, and I'm assuming that you think that too, huh?
oh, yes,
Yeah.
definitely. The sounds are so much fun. And I think, yeah, kids are born with a love of language. I can see that with my grandsons when they'd cry as a baby, and I'd say a nursery rhyme that would quiet them. They just, very young age, love to hear rhymes and the music of language. So that's really good. And in developing that and encouraging that through poetry reading. I think it's great for parents to read poetry aloud to their kids.
And also I think sometimes parents might feel intimidated. They might feel like, ooh, poetry, so, you know, unaccessible and out of my reach. But I like to point out that lots and lots of picture books are written poetically and
Mm-hmm.
are, also have rhyme and rhythm included. So like you can start there and then graduate to things that that parents might consider to be more formal poetry. And there's so many great poets out there for children too.
There are wonderful. And I brought with me, Sammy, a book that was my first poetry book as a
Oh,
kid.
what is
And
it?
I
Show
read it to my
us.
daughters, and I plan to read it to my grandsons too. It's by Robert Louis Stevenson, who was a Scottish writer, A Child's Garden of Verses. Beautiful language, and it's meant to be, read aloud. I mentioned too, I think it's interesting. I was excited when I found out that Robert Louis Stevenson's wife was born here in Indianapolis. She grew up on Monument Circle, but back then it looked different.
Oh my goodness, I had
And
no idea.
this
Amazing.
was in the 1800s.
Wow.
And this is when the forest was close to Monument Circle. So she very much liked to play out in nature. So during the day, she would go out with her friends and play in the woods and then come back home.
That's just incredible. What a wonderful connection. I love that. Well, Sherry, I'm wondering if you have a poem that you could share with us today.
Oh, sure.
Is that okay?
Yes, I did bring a book.
Yay!
I brought the same book you have pictured there.
Perfect. I love it.
I actually have three books of poems, but Evening Chore was my first one. This poem is called The Gathering, and I wrote it when I mentioned that I studied poetry at Indiana University. And so I wrote this during that time. My husband and I were, well, we were dating at the time, and it was almost Christmas, and we were walking around the courthouse square. I think we were doing some shopping, and we noticed something going on in the sky that made us stop, and everyone was stopping. So here's the poem. The Gathering. We stop, not for the pedestrian light, but to watch the courthouse tree, its winter branches quivering with wings like dried leaves, thousands and thousands. As if a gust of wind lifts them, they rise, one cloud into the heavy sky. They swing like skaters playing crack the whip 3 times around the courthouse square, strung with silver lights, then divide over and over like amoeba and swim behind the Episcopal Church. While they are gone and we stand looking upward as if for fireworks, a man emerges from a parked car, joins our corner. I almost hit someone watching the birds, starlings, he says. Suddenly, they are back, wheeling above our heads, a spiraling molecule of DNA. We remember the news on public radio only the night before, how dinosaurs were more like birds than lizards, warm-blooded, traveling in herds. Imagine, you say, how this must have looked when birds were dinosaurs. And now their flight becomes some ancient calligraphy I've forgotten how to read. When the birds finally settle and resume the shape of leaves, the sky seems so deserted, like a child's magic stencil board when the page has been lifted and the writing disappears.
Oh my gosh, Shari. That's so beautiful.
Oh, thank
I
you, Sam.
loved it. And it was about birds. And
I know.
I am a bird and I love birds.
Sammy, I chose it because I wanted a bird poem. I actually have a lot of bird poems, but that one is one of my favorites. So I'm glad you liked it.
You've made my bird heart so happy. It's lovely. And I've had that experience before where you're outside and you just see like a cloud of birds, you know? And it's so amazing to see. Shari, thank you so much for
Oh,
sharing that with us.
you're welcome.
It was wonderful. Well, gosh, I just loved this and I'm so excited to talk to more poets, and you've given me a little bit of confidence to talk to poets too. So
Oh,
thanks.
well, thank you, Sammy. I
Well,
always
this
like talking about poetry.
wonderful. Well, this has been great. And this is Sammy, your favorite Hoosier Toucan, reminding you to read local. So long, everybody. Bye, Shari.
Bye, Sammy.